What happens when one of Hollywood's most legendary actors sits down for what should be a routine interview and things spiral completely out of control? When Samuel L. Jackson walked onto the set of Tamron Hall's show, nobody expected the conversation to take the turn it did. What started as a standard promotional appearance slowly transformed into a confrontation so tense, so personal, that it shocked everyone watching. Before we get into exactly what was said and how it all began to unravel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think really happened here. So let's set the scene. The studio lights are bright, the band finishes its cue, and Samuel L. Jackson steps out to thunderous applause. He's calm, confident, carrying that unmistakable presence that's followed him through decades of Hollywood dominance. Tamron Hall greets him warmly, smiling, professional, clearly excited to have such a major guest on her stage. They exchange pleasantries, a few laughs, and Jackson settles into his chair. At first, everything feels exactly how it should. Tamron opens with familiar ground. She talks about his longevity, his influence, the fact that he's managed to stay relevant across generations. Jackson responds easily, tossing in jokes, charming the audience, speaking with the comfort of someone who has answered these questions hundreds of times before. The energy is relaxed, safe, even celebratory. Then the tone shifts. Tamron brings up a recent interview Jackson gave elsewhere, where he spoke critically about the state of Hollywood. He'd said studios were prioritizing profits over storytelling, franchises over originality. At the time, the comments barely raised eyebrows. Actors say things like this all the time, but Tamron doesn't let it sit at surface level. She leans in and asks whether his own career choices reflect that criticism, pointing out his involvement in massive blockbuster franchises. The air changes instantly. Jackson's smile tightens. He leans back slightly, eyes narrowing just a bit. His response is measured, but firmer. He explains that commercial success doesn't cancel out artistic value, that he chooses roles that challenge him, that scale and craft can coexist. The audience nods along. So far, he's handling it. But Tamron presses again. She mentions Marvel by name. She asks when it stops being about the art and starts being about the paycheck. This time, the silence in the room is unmistakable. Jackson leans forward now. His voice sharpens. He talks about the thousands of people those films employ, the fans they inspire, the work he puts into every role. He's no longer joking. He's defending something deeply personal. Tamron listens, nods, and then calmly reframes the question. She says she's not denying his talent, only asking whether there's a contradiction between his criticism and his participation. And that's when the conversation stops being an interview and starts becoming. Jackson's jaw tightens, and the shift in his body language is impossible to miss. He leans forward, locking eyes with Tamron, and his voice drops into something colder, more deliberate. He says that framing his career as a contradiction is a reductive way to look at decades of work. He talks about intention, about craft, about how just because something is popular or profitable doesn't mean it lacks substance. The audience is completely quiet now, hanging on every word. Tamron doesn't interrupt. She lets him finish, then calmly responds that the question isn't meant as an accusation. She says it's about accountability, about public figures reconciling their public statements with their choices. It's a fair question, she insists. But Jackson clearly doesn't hear it that way. His tone sharpens. He says, "Fair? You want to talk about fair?" Then, unexpectedly, he turns the spotlight back on her. He asks how many hard-hitting, investigative pieces she's done recently compared to celebrity interviews. He gestures around the studio, the polished set, the cameras. He says she's part of the same system she's critiquing, sitting comfortably while questioning his integrity. The audience audibly gasps. This isn't playful banter anymore. This is confrontation. For a split second, Tamron looks stunned. Then she recovers, reminding him that she's not the one being interviewed. She says they're there to talk about his work, not her career. But Jackson is heated now. He accuses her of chasing ratings, of setting him up for a gotcha moment. He says she buttered him up with easy questions just to pull the rug out from under him. Tamron tries to de-escalate. She says she has tremendous respect for him and that these are genuine questions people have. She suggests moving on to his upcoming project, the reason he's there. But Jackson shakes his head. He says it's too late for that. In his mind, the damage is already done. He says now she wants to promote after trying to tear him down. His words are sharp, and they're personal. Tamron's voice firms. She says she asked one question, and that if he feels attacked, maybe he should examine why. She reminds him she's a journalist. That asking challenging questions is literally her job. The audience is frozen. No clapping. No murmurs. Just tension. That's when Jackson stands up. He says maybe he shouldn't be doing this interview at all. Maybe he shouldn't have come. Tamron stands too, telling him to sit down, reminding him they're in the middle of a taping. Jackson laughs, but there's no humor in it. He tells her she doesn't get to order him around. He came as a guest, and he's realizing he's not welcome. Tamron pushes back, saying he is welcome, but not if he's going to be disrespectful. Jackson fires right back, saying she made it personal the moment she questioned his integrity. Voices are raised now. The crew in the background is visibly uneasy. And this is the moment where the situation crosses a line that can. The temperature in the studio feels unbearable now. Tamron's face flushes as she tells him that. Questioning his integrity was never her intention. She insists she asked about his career choices, not his character. Jackson doesn't accept that distinction. He says when you question why someone does their work, you are questioning who they are. For him, those two things can't be separated. Tamron reminds him she has interviewed presidents, world leaders, people who have survived unimaginable trauma, and they've all managed to handle tough questions. The implication lands hard. Jackson takes a step closer to her desk, his voice rising as he tells her not to compare him to her other guests. He accuses her of provoking him and then acting surprised when he responds. At this point, the audience can barely breathe. Production staff shift nervously at the edges of the stage. Tamron tries to regain control, asking if they can reset, reminding him they have an audience and cameras rolling. Jackson looks around the studio, then back at her, and says professionally speaking, this is one of the worst interviews he's ever been part of. He accuses her of coming in with an agenda and pretending she doesn't have one now that he's calling it out. Tamron's voice rises slightly. She says she did not come in with an agenda, only questions that are relevant to someone with his influence. If he can't see the difference between an attack and accountability, she says she doesn't know what to tell him. Jackson fires back that she's trying to make a name for herself by taking shots at people who've already made theirs. He says she wants a viral moment, controversy, people talking about her show. Tamron crosses her arms and tells him people will be talking, but not in the way he thinks. She says they'll be talking about how one of Hollywood's biggest stars couldn't handle a simple question without losing his temper on national television. The audience reacts audibly to that, a mix of gasps and murmurs. Jackson's eyes narrow. He says this isn't a tantrum, it's self-respect. He says he refuses to let his words and his career be twisted into something they're not. Tamron says what makes her uncomfortable is watching someone she respected behave like a child over one challenging question. She asks why, if he's so confident in his choices, this rattled him so much. That's when Jackson accuses her of gaslighting. The word hits the room like a shockwave. Tamron's face drains of color, then flushes red. She tells him that's a serious accusation and completely unfounded. She says she's done nothing but try to have a professional conversation while he's hurled insults at her, her show, and her integrity. Jackson spreads his arms and says defending himself isn't manipulation. He says she invited him there, attacked his character, and now wants to play the victim. Tamron's voice turns cold and controlled. She lists the things he said about her in just the last few minutes. The room feels frozen in time as Jackson says he's done. Tamron tells him that if he walks off now, everyone will see exactly what happened, and she asks if that's really the legacy he wants. Jackson turns back toward her, calm but unshaken, and says his legacy was established long before he ever stepped onto this stage. What people will see, he says, is a man who stood up for himself and refused to play games. Tamron takes a breath, her voice softer now, almost pleading. She tells him she respects him enough to ask real questions, instead of lobbing softballs. She says she never intended to hurt or attack him. Jackson listens, and for just a moment, his expression softens. He says he's sorry she feels disrespected, but he feels the same way, and he doesn't think she's willing to hear that. Tamron wipes at her eyes quickly and says she can hear him. She just doesn't agree. She tells him she did nothing wrong by asking that question, but it's clear they're not going to find common ground. Maybe, she says quietly, he should go. Jackson nods. He says maybe he should. He reaches up and starts removing his microphone. A producer rushes in to help, but he waves them off, saying he can handle it himself. Tamron watches from behind her desk, arms crossed, trying to hold herself together. She tells him, for what it's worth, that she truly admired his work and wishes things had gone differently. Jackson pauses, mic in hand, and says he wishes that too. But wishing doesn't change what happened. The studio is completely silent as he walks toward the edge of the stage. Tamron calls his name. He stops, but doesn't turn around. She tells him he's making a mistake. He answers calmly that maybe he is, but it's his mistake to make. And then he walks off. Security appears from the wings. Crew members move quickly, trying to regain control as the organized chaos of a show falling apart in real time unfolds. Tamron stands there for a moment longer, then slowly sits back down, her hands trembling as she reaches for her notes, the camera still rolling. That's what happened when Samuel L. Jackson sat down with Tamron Hall for what should have been a routine interview, and instead became a confrontation nobody saw coming. Two strong personalities, one loaded question, and a moment that left viewers divided. Now I have to ask you, was Tamron out of line with her question, or was Samuel too defensive? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, make sure you subscribe.